I was staring at a piece of paper that proved my life for the last 8 months was a total lie. The dates on this hospital bill were right there in stark black ink. It showed my sister got treated for a shattered arm a full week before the car crash she blamed me for. I remember the exact moment my hands started to shake. I was sitting on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by stacks of mail and insurance claims I'd been organizing for her. For 8 months, I carried a mountain of guilt so heavy it completely dictated my life. I drained my savings and put off grad school just to help her out. I lost countless nights of sleep, just staring at the ceiling. I kept replaying the sound of tires skidding on wet pavement, wishing I'd just driven a little slower. But looking at this single sheet of paper from an urgent care clinic 300 miles away, the fog kind of lifted. It was instantly replaced by this sharp, suffocating wave of betrayal. She already had a broken arm, and she used me to cover it up. To understand how something this twisted could even happen, you gotta understand my family. My younger sister, Chloe, was the undisputed golden child. She was a classical cello prodigy. Or at least that's the story my parents aggressively pushed since she was 6. Her entire identity, and my parents' entire identity, was wrapped up in her hands and her music career. Everything in our house revolved around Chloe's practice schedule and her fragile artistic temperament. There was no room for anyone else. I, on the other hand, was the reliable one. The invisible backup generator that kept the house running while everyone else focused on the main stage. I worked 2 jobs to put myself through a state college, while they funded her expensive conservatory. I never resented her for the music, but I hated how she could be totally reckless and get away with it. But the one thing my parents and her instructors absolutely did not tolerate was physical risk. Her future depended entirely on her physical perfection. Which brings me to the week before the accident. It was late November, and Chloe had supposedly gone on a quiet weekend retreat to study music theory. When she came back, she was acting incredibly strange. I stopped by to drop off some soup, and she barely opened the door. She was wearing this massive, oversized wool sweater, which was weird because her heat was always blasting. She kept her right arm tucked awkwardly against her stomach, snapped at me, and slammed the door. 3 days later, she called me acting super sweet. She asked if I could drive her to a dress fitting because she was too exhausted for city traffic. Like always, I just said yes. When I picked her up, it was pouring rain and visibility was terrible. She got into the passenger seat still wearing that massive, bulky wool coat. I remember it seemed so weird for a car ride. I asked if she wanted to take it off so she could buckle up comfortably, but she rigidly refused. She just sat there, strangely tense, staring straight ahead at the rain. About 20 minutes into the drive, we were coming up on a notoriously tricky intersection. The light turned yellow and the car in front of me slammed on its brakes, completely out of nowhere. I reacted instantly and hit the brakes hard, but my tires lost traction on the wet leaves and slick asphalt. We started skidding forward at maybe 15 miles an hour. We bumped into the back bumper of the car ahead of us. It was just a fender bender. The airbags didn't even deploy. My seatbelt locked, but otherwise I was perfectly fine. But before I could even unbuckle my seatbelt, Chloe started screaming. It wasn't just a startled cry, it was this blood-curdling, theatrical shriek. She was clutching her right arm and sobbing hysterically. I totally panicked and asked her what was wrong. She just kept screaming that her arm was shattered, that her career was over, and that I had ruined her life. When the ambulance arrived, the paramedics carefully helped her out. Because of that bulky coat, they couldn't see the injury right away. and she aggressively refused to let them cut the sleeve.
I was an absolute wreck.
I was hyperventilating on the side of the road while giving my statement to the police.
I was completely consumed by the horror that I had just destroyed my sister's future.
I barely remember the drive to the emergency room.
I was just completely numb, shaking in my wet clothes under those awful fluorescent lights.
I kept praying it wasn't as bad as she made it sound.
My parents beat me there.
When my mom walked up to me in the waiting room, she didn't even try to hug me. She didn't even ask if I was hurt. She just looked at me with this pure, unfiltered disgust. She told me Chloe had a severe spiral fracture in her right arm. Her winter showcase was completely canceled. Her conservatory scholarship was hanging by a thread. Everything we had worked for, just gone. And then she looked me dead in the eyes. She said, "I hope you're happy. You finally found a way to tear her down." I felt like the floor just dropped out from under me. I was so devastated. I just took it. I accepted every single ounce of the blame. I apologized until my voice was literally hoarse, but it didn't matter. They needed a villain, and I was right there. The next 8 months were just relentless punishment. Since Chloe couldn't play, she lost all her paid gigs. My parents demanded I cover her rent, saying it was the absolute least I could do. So I emptied my savings. I didn't even fight them on it. I felt so guilty, I took a weekend job at a coffee shop on top of my full-time admin job. I was working 7 days a week just to keep her afloat. When the holidays rolled around, I was officially uninvited. My mom said seeing me would be too traumatizing for Chloe. So I spent Thanksgiving alone on my floor, eating cheap takeout while they treated her like a wounded war hero. Chloe played her part perfectly, of course. She soaked up all the attention, lounging around my parents' house with her custom brace. She loved being the center of their universe again, playing the tragic victim whose dreams were stolen. She even started a GoFundMe for a custom lightweight cello for her physical therapy. I sat in my dark apartment watching the donations pour in. Every single post she made casually mentioned the tragic accident caused by her careless older sister. I managed Chloe's ridiculous pile of mail. She claimed she was too depressed to look at bills. Mostly, it was just credit card statements. But then I opened an envelope from her health insurance provider. It was an explanation of benefits for a denied claim. I expected a physical therapy charge, but the location caught my eye. It was an urgent care clinic in a mountain resort town. The exact town where she supposedly went for a music retreat. My eyes moved to the date of service. November 12th. The car accident was on November 19th. I stared at the billing codes, listed clearly on the page. Radiologic examination, forearm. Application of short arm splint. Diagnosis, closed fracture of the radius. The room spun. I literally had to put my hands flat on the floor to steady myself. The dates were undeniable. She had broken her arm a full week before she ever stepped foot into my car. Suddenly, every strange detail from that week clicked into place. The oversized wool sweater. The way she refused to open the door all the way, keeping her arm tucked against her stomach. She hadn't gone on a music retreat. She went to the mountains, did something stupid like snowboarding, and shattered her arm. She knew if our parents found out, they'd cut her off entirely. She'd lose the golden child status she relied on. She needed a scapegoat. She needed an accident that wasn't her fault. So she called me to drive her. She wore that massive coat to hide the temporary splint.
She sat in my car, waiting for any minor jolt to scream and blame the impact. She set me up. She watched me break under the weight of the guilt, all to protect her own ego. The grief vanished in an instant. It was replaced by a cold, sharp, perfectly focused anger. I needed bulletproof evidence. The next morning, I called in sick to both of my jobs. I got in my car and drove 3 hours north to the mountain town listed on that bill. I didn't even turn on the radio. I just drove with this singular, burning focus. I went straight to the urgent care clinic. Because I was still listed as Chloe's emergency contact, I had medical power of attorney on file. I handled all her accident paperwork, remember? So I calmly told the receptionist we were consolidating her files for a new surgeon. 15 minutes later, I walked out with a printed medical file. I stood in the cold mountain air and flipped it open. Right there on top were the intake forms. Signed by Chloe in her unmistakable handwriting, clearly dated November 12th. The file was a gold mine. It had the doctor's notes explicitly stating she suffered a fall while snowboarding, which was a massive violation of her conservatorship contract. It even had the initial x-rays, clearly showing the spiral fracture in her right arm. But I didn't stop there. I sat in my car and pulled up social media. I started digging through the profiles of the friends she went on the trip with. Chloe was careful not to post anything herself. But her friends, not so much. It took me 3 hours of relentless scrolling. My eyes were burning, but I finally found it. Buried in a tagged photo on a private account. There was the smoking gun. A picture of Chloe at a ski lodge. She was holding a drink in her left hand, and her right arm was secured in a heavy medical splint. The caption literally read, "Chloe took a hard wipeout on the Black Diamond Trail, but the party doesn't stop." It was posted on November 13th. 6 days before she ever got into my car. I took screenshots of everything. I drove back to the city, printed all the documents, and went to an office supply store. I bought 3 heavy black presentation folders. I carefully organized the insurance denial, the medical forms, and the photograph into each one. I was building a case. I was a ghost over the next few days. Chloe texted me twice, complaining her rent check was late and demanding money. I didn't reply. My mother left a voicemail, scolding me for ignoring my sister's needs. I just saved the voicemail. I felt this strange, detached calm settle over me. For my entire life, I had been the emotional shock absorber for this family. I absorbed their anxiety, their demands, and their blame. But looking at those 3 black folders, the shock absorber was finally broken. The perfect opportunity arrived that Saturday. My parents were hosting a lavish dinner party at their house. It was a recovery celebration for Chloe to thank everyone who donated. I wasn't invited, of course. My mom explicitly told me my presence would ruin the supportive atmosphere, which made it the absolute perfect time to show up. I walked up the front steps carrying the 3 black folders and opened the door without knocking. Inside, about 20 people were gathered in the main dining room. Chloe was sitting at the head of the table, showing off her custom brace. She was telling a story, her voice dripping with practiced vulnerability. The room went dead silent when I walked in. Every eye turned to me, standing in the doorway in my worn jacket holding the folders. I had never felt more powerful. My mother stood up immediately, her face flushing with anger. She hissed at me, keeping her voice low to avoid a scene. She told me I was upsetting my sister and demanded to know why I was there. Chloe immediately put her hand to her chest, looking away from me. She played the traumatized victim to absolute perfection. Several guests glared at me, clearly viewing me as the cruel, reckless older sister. I told them I wasn't there to stay. My voice was completely steady. I said I had some important paperwork regarding Chloe's accident to deliver.
And since everyone who paid for her recovery was there, it was the perfect time.
My dad stepped toward me and told me to leave right then.
But I wasn't going to be intimidated anymore.
I just said no and stepped right past him. My eyes were locked entirely on the dining table.
I walked directly to the dining table, the folders feeling like anchors of truth. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife.
I approached the head of the table where they were frozen. I placed the first black folder right in front of my mother.
I placed the second folder in front of my father's empty chair. And I dropped the third folder directly onto Chloe's plate. The heavy thud echoed in the silent room.
Chloe just stared at the black folder.
For the first time in her entire life, her perfect mask slipped.
She looked up at me, and I saw a flash of genuine, unadulterated panic in her eyes.
My mother immediately demanded to know what it was as she opened the folder.
The room went dead silent.
She pulled back the heavy black cover, revealing the stark white medical documents inside. I told her it was the truth, making sure every single guest could hear me. I listed exactly what was in there: the intake forms, the doctor's notes, and the x-rays from the mountain clinic. All dated November 12th, 7 days before the car accident. The silence in the room became heavy and suffocating. My mother just stared at the papers. Her eyes darted back and forth across the medical codes and Chloe's unmistakable signature. The reality of those dates was completely undeniable. I calmly instructed them to turn to the second page. That's where the doctor detailed how she broke her arm snowboarding. Then I told them to look at the third page. A lovely photo of Chloe drinking at a ski lodge with a splint on her arm 6 days before she got in my car.
Chloe choked out my name, begging me to stop.
She was sad. You could just tell by the way her voice sounded. A little shaky, like maybe she was about to cry.
She reached out across the table to grab the folder, desperate to hide the evidence.
But my father pulled it away from her. His face turned completely pale as he looked down at the printed photograph. The perfect illusion he had protected for so long was shattering right in front of him.
I turned to the guests, who were all staring at Chloe in absolute shock.
I explained how she went to the mountains and broke her arm being reckless. Knowing she'd lose her funding, she manipulated me into driving her. She hid a splint under a coat, waited for a fender bender, and screamed that I shattered her arm. Chloe stood up abruptly, screaming that it was a lie. Tears were spilling down her face as she accused me of just trying to hurt her. She tried to play the victim one last time, but the performance was completely falling apart. My voice cut through her hysterics like ice. I reminded her that the hospital records had her signature and the dates didn't lie. I told her she committed insurance fraud and GoFundMe fraud. And I made sure she knew I had already forwarded everything to the authorities. My mother looked up from the folder, her hands physically shaking. She looked at Chloe, the golden child, the perfect prodigy, and for the first time, she didn't see a victim. She saw exactly who she had raised. The silence in the room was deafening.
My mother's voice cracked when she finally spoke.
She just whispered, "Chloe, is this true? Did you fake the accident?" Chloe backed away from the table, looking frantically at everyone. She started sobbing, screaming that it was an accident on the mountain. She said she didn't mean to do it. But she knew they would have cut her off and taken everything away. And then, in her desperate panic, her true colors finally bled through. She screamed that I was just a receptionist,
She actually said my life didn't matter as much as hers?
That I could afford to take the blame. A collective gasp rippled through the entire room.
Chloe clammed her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. She realized exactly what she had just said out loud. She had just admitted to 20 people that my life was completely disposable. My father dropped the black folder onto the table like it burned him. He looked at his golden child with profound disgust. The guests started murmuring, awkwardly standing up to leave. The perfect illusion they had built was completely shattered. I looked at my sister, standing in the wreckage of her own lies. I didn't feel sorry for her.
I wasn't even angry anymore.
For the first time in my life, I just felt wonderfully free. I looked right at her, and my voice was completely steady.
I told her she was right. My life didn't matter to her,
but it mattered to me. I turned to my parents, who were standing, frozen in shock. I told them I was done paying her bills. I was done being the scapegoat for their terrible parenting. I told them not to contact me, because they had exactly the daughter they deserved. I turned around and walked out of the dining room. I didn't look back. I walked out the front door and into the cool night air. The house of cards was collapsing, and I wasn't going to clean it up. Behind me, I could hear the muffled sounds of chaos erupting inside the house. My dad was yelling, and Chloe was sobbing hysterically, begging someone to listen. The whole house of cards was finally collapsing. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be the one to clean it up. When I got to my car, I just sat in the driver's seat and took a deep breath. The crushing weight that had been sitting on my chest for 8 months, it was just completely gone. I felt this profound sense of peace wash over me. I started the engine, put the car in drive, and pulled away from the house. I didn't look back at the mansion or the life I was leaving behind. I was finally free from their toxic grip. Over the next few weeks, the fallout was spectacular. GoFundMe froze Chloe's account and refunded all the donors because of the fraud. Her conservatory caught wind of the situation too, and since she blatantly violated her conduct clauses, they revoked her scholarship entirely. Faced with the undeniable proof and the public humiliation, my parents finally cut her off. Without my money to float her, Chloe was forced to move out of her luxury apartment. She had to move back into my parents' house. And now they just live in this bitter, resentful standoff. My mom tried to call me a few times after that. She left these crying voicemails saying she was sorry and that she didn't know. She even asked if we could go to family therapy to heal. But it was way too little and way too late. I deleted the voicemails without even listening to the end. Then I changed my number so they could never reach me again. I was completely done being their emotional punching bag. I packed up my apartment and finalized my enrollment for grad school. I was moving out of state, starting over. People say family is everything, and you should always forgive your blood. But some betrayals are just too precise, too calculated to ever be forgiven. Chloe didn't just make a mistake. She built a literal stage out of my suffering so she could keep playing the victim. But the performance is over now. The curtain is permanently closed. As I drive toward my new life, leaving all that noise and manipulation behind, I realized the truth. The greatest victory wasn't exposing her lie to the world. It was finally recognizing my own worth enough to walk away. For the first time in my life, the silence in my car didn't feel heavy. It wasn't the kind of silence where I was just bracing myself for the next disaster to strike. I used to think my value was tied to how much I could fix for them. Like, I had to set myself on fire just to keep them warm. But out here on the open road,
With hundreds of miles between me and that house, the air just feels completely different. It's like I can finally breathe. I don't know what Chloe is telling people these days. I'm sure she's spun some news story where she's the tragic victim and I'm the awful sister who abandoned her. And honestly, I'm totally fine with that.
Let her have her stage.
Let them keep their perfect, fragile little illusion. Because the truth is, you can't heal in the exact same environment that broke you. Sometimes you just gotta pack up and walk right into the unknown. When I finally unlocked the door to my new place, it was completely empty. No stacks of medical bills. No frantic voicemails. Just quiet, open space. I start my grad program next week. I'm paying my own rent on my own terms. And I'm not carrying the weight of someone else's lies anymore. It took me 26 years to figure out that setting a boundary isn't an act of cruelty.
It's an act of survival.
I spent my whole life being the invisible backup generator for my family.
But not anymore.
Now I'm the main character of my own life.